My parents exploited me for years, and my sister never did anything until I said enough. There's a day in my life I'll never forget. It wasn't when I graduated. It wasn't when I got married. It wasn't when my daughter was born. It was a day that may seem simple, but it changed everything. I came home from work exhausted, my head heavy with so much pressure and responsibility, and I asked my parents for something that seemed so small, to keep my daughter for one night, because my wife and I needed a few hours of rest. My daughter was just a few months old. I hadn't slept properly in weeks, and I just wanted to breathe. I thought it would be natural to count on them, since I'd spent years paying their bills, solving every household problem, even supporting my sister. But the answer came back bluntly, like a slap in the face. "We're not your employees." I remember the silence afterward. I stood there in disbelief. My heart raced, my face burning with shame and anger at the same time. I wasn't asking for some favor, for luxury, or even money. I just wanted my parents to help me for a few hours with their granddaughter. That's when it hit me. All those years of work, all the money I'd given them without question, all the life I'd put off to juggle 1,000 jobs and pay their bills. None of it meant anything. I was just an ATM. The worst part wasn't the no. The worst part was finding out that same day that they were babysitting my sister's children. I saw it with my own eyes because my cousin commented on a post my mother made on social media, showing how she was a dedicated grandmother helping her daughter. Her daughter, not me. I felt like my stomach had turned inside out. It seemed like all the sacrifices I'd made were worthless. They never saw me as a son, only as someone to solve their problems. And my sister was always their priority, always defended, always placed on a pedestal. I remember coming home that day and crying. I don't usually cry. I always swallow a lot of things in silence, but that day I couldn't. My wife hugged me, and all I could say was that I couldn't believe what had happened. I felt used, deceived, disposable. I felt like an idiot who'd spent my entire life supporting people who'd never given me anything in return, other than demands and emotional blackmail. I thought about everything I'd done, how many times I'd delayed my own things, how many dreams I'd shelved, how many debts I'd taken on to cover my parents. Expenses. All of this, and in the end, they'd thrown it in my face that they weren't my employees. My name is Andre. I'm 36 years old, and that day was the beginning of my liberation. It hurts even to write this, but it was the day I realized I needed to cut the cord for good, or I would never have peace. Until then, I was afraid of disappointing, afraid of what my family would say, afraid of seeming ungrateful. But their no opened my eyes. For the first time, I had clarity that I wasn't the one in the wrong. What was wrong was remaining trapped in a role they'd cast me into from an early age, that of provider for a family that never saw me as a real son. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, looking at my daughter in her crib and thinking about how different I wanted to be for my children than my parents were for me. I felt like it had all been a big show. While I was killing myself working, they lived as if they had no obligations. My father always used health as an excuse to not lift a finger. My mother always made a big deal out of it, blaming me for everything. And my sister lived like a princess without having to take responsibility for anything. And there I was, supporting them all, feeling like the worst of children when I dared to say I was tired. I remember every bill I paid. I remember the times I was late paying the rent on my own apartment because I had to save electricity at my parents' house. I remember when their refrigerator broke and I spent the money I'd saved for my daughter's layette because family comes first. Today I see that was a lie. Family to them was always my sister. I was just the bank. I handed over my salary and they continued living as if nothing had a limit. And when I needed help one night, I was worthless. This memory destroys me and at the same time gives me strength because it was the wake-up call I needed. I won't deny that the first thing I felt was shame. ashamed of myself for having fallen into this game for so many years. I looked at my wife and felt guilty. Guilt for having let her live in this situation with me for so long, having to share the burden of a family that was never enough. She always warned me, always told me it wasn't fair, but I couldn't see it. I was afraid to cut the bond, afraid of being seen as ungrateful, afraid of what others would say. I was a hostage to my mother's manipulation, her crying jags, her accusations that I was heartless. But that day, seeing them caring for my sister's children while denying me help, fear turned to anger, a rage that burned inside, but with it came a clarity I'd never felt before. I thought, they don't deserve anything from me anymore. It wasn't an easy decision, because cutting off your own parents isn't something you ever imagine you'll do. But I knew that if I didn't act radically, I'd never break free. I had to choose between continuing to be sucked in until the end, or having the courage to be the villain in the story they were going to tell others. And I became the villain, yes. The next day, my mother had already posted on social media playing the victim, saying that ungrateful children abandon their sick parents. My uncles called me demanding explanations. Distant relatives sent messages full of indirect messages, and I kept quiet. For the first time, I didn't rush to justify myself. I didn't apologize. I didn't try to explain. It hurt to read all that. It hurt to have my name tarnished by the mouth of someone who had never helped me in any way. But at the same time, I felt a strange freedom, as if the chain had finally snapped. At first, I trembled just thinking about what I'd done. It felt like I was committing a crime, as if cutting off my parents' money was a monstrous thing. But with each passing day, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I began to see my daughter differently, with more calm, more presence. For the first time, I had the energy to play with her, without being exhausted. I realized I was always emotionally absent because my mind was always occupied with my family's problems. When I cut that off, I could finally breathe. Still, I won't lie, the guilt attacks came hard. My mother would send me long audio messages crying, calling me a monster, saying I'd ruined their lives. My father would send short messages, always with that victim tone, saying his health couldn't handle that kind of stress. It was like I was the villain in a soap opera they'd made up. I had to hold myself back from falling into that trap again. One day, I almost picked up the phone and said I'd help, but my wife stopped me and said, "Think about Clara." And I did. Clara was my guiding light. She was the reason I wanted to be different. I looked at that little face and knew I couldn't repeat the cycle. I didn't want her to grow up seeing her father humiliating himself to grandparents who only knew how to suck. I didn't want her to think that's what love is: demands, blackmail, manipulation. I wanted her to grow up knowing that we can set limits, even on those we love, and that sometimes love means saying no. This gave me strength in the moments when I almost fell apart. One of the hardest things was putting up with my relatives. There are always those who know nothing about the story but love to offer their opinions. People saying I was cold, that I should understand that a father and mother are forever, as if I didn't know that. I do, but I also know that fathers and mothers don't have the right to destroy their children's lives, to suck every last drop out of them. These people didn't pay any of the bills I paid. They didn't stop buying anything for my children to afford grown-ups. They spoke from a place of comfort without having experienced what I had. In this process, I discovered that my wife was stronger than I imagined. She never pressured me, even though she saw the money disappearing every month. She never told me I was wrong. She just supported me patiently until I was ready, and when I finally made the decision, she was there. The day my mother posted those things online, she hugged me and said, "Now you will have peace." And it was like a reality check. I deserved peace. I just hadn't realized it yet. The strangest thing was feeling empty in the early days, as if I'd lost a part of myself. I was used to living my life revolving around my parents and sister. My routine was thinking about their bills, their needs, their excuses. When that ended, I felt like I didn't know what to do with the time and money I had left. But I soon realized that that emptiness was actually space. Space to live my life, to think about myself, my wife, my daughter. It was a relief I'd never experienced. I also discovered that I was sicker than I'd imagined, not physically, but mentally. I'd become used to living with anxiety, daily headaches, gastritis, and no energy for anything. All of this was a consequence of the weight I was carrying. When I cut it down, it wasn't a miracle, but little by little, my body began to respond. I slept better, ate better, and even my work ethic improved. I realized the exploitation wasn't just financial, it was also emotional and physical. I was slowly killing myself without realizing it. My sister, of course, became the perfect victim of the situation. She told everyone that I had abandoned our parents, that now she was the only one taking care of them. And they both reinforced this, as if she were the martyr. But I knew the truth. She didn't take care of anything, never had. They kept patting her on the head while painting me as the villain. At first, it made me angry. I wanted to scream to the world what had happened. But then I realized there was no need. Those who wanted to believe, believed. Those who truly knew the difference. One day, my cousin Jessica texted me saying she'd seen my mother's post and couldn't believe what she was reading. She'd always known how things were. She said, "Andre, I know the truth. They can deceive others, but not us, who have always seen how you sacrificed yourself." Reading that gave me enormous peace. It was like a reminder that I wasn't crazy, that someone had seen through it. Sometimes we just need a voice saying, "I saw it, I know." And that's what she did for me. After that day, I stopped worrying about my family's opinion. I stopped trying to justify myself. I stopped responding indirectly. I decided my focus would be on my home, my daughter, my wife. Let them say what they wanted. I had already given too much. I had already wasted years of my life trying to be the perfect son, the responsible one, the one who could handle anything. Enough. I didn't want that role anymore. I wanted to be just me. And most importantly, I wanted to be a real father to Clara. Over time, I realized my decision wasn't just a cut, it was a fresh start. I started saving real money, something I'd never managed before. I bought things for my daughter without worrying about whether my parents wouldn't have enough. I made plans with Paula without having to hide money or calculate what would be left after paying for their house. I started dreaming again, and it scared me because I'd forgotten what it was like to dream. I was always stuck in survival mode, putting out fires that weren't even mine. For the first time, I saw that life could be different. Of course, it still hurt. There were nights I'd lie down and cry alone, thinking maybe I'd been too harsh. Sometimes my mother's voice echoed in my head, calling me ungrateful, and it hurt. But then I'd remember Clara's face, her smile when she saw me come home from work, and the guilt would turn into certainty. I couldn't repeat the cycle. I couldn't be an example of submission and exploitation. I needed to show my daughter that love isn't about self-denial, it's about building together. One day my mother called me and I almost didn't answer. But I did. And it was the same old story, crying, saying I was in need. Only this time I responded firmly, "Mom, I can't be responsible for your lives anymore. I have my own family now." She screamed, called me a monster, and hung up on me. It hurt, of course, but at the same time it was liberating, because I finally said out loud what I needed to say years ago. I chose myself. I chose my family. Today, I look back and see an Andre I no longer recognize. A man who was always tired, with no sparkle in his eyes, always afraid of disappointing. And I see the man I am now, still wounded, still scarred, but free. I'm no longer my parents' ATM. I'm Clara's father, Paula's husband, the master of my own life. And no one can take that away from me. If I can leave anyone reading this with anything, it's this. Don't be afraid to set limits, even if it's with your parents. It's not easy, it's painful, but sometimes it's the only way to avoid losing yourself. It took me 36 years to understand this, but I did. Today I'm lighter, more present, and most importantly, truer to myself. The pain still exists, but the peace I've achieved is much greater. I'll never go back. Today, I wake up and look at my work and my routine differently. Before, I was always carrying a weight on my shoulders that wasn't even mine, feeling obligated to solve problems that never really asked for my help. Now, I make my own choices for myself and my family. The freedom to decide what to do with my time and money has given me a strength I've never felt before. I'm still afraid of making mistakes, but it's a different kind of fear. It's not the fear of being used. It's the fear of wasting my life. I learned that overcoming adversity isn't magic. It's not one day when you wake up and everything is resolved. It's a slow process made up of small daily victories. Every time I said no, every time I stood firm in the face of my mother's manipulation, I grew stronger. Every time I looked at Clara's smile and felt I was building a future for her different from the one I had, I gained more courage. Life doesn't wait for those who sacrifice themselves for others without limit. My wife was instrumental in this process, but I realized that the greatest strength came from within. I had to look in the mirror and decide that I deserved respect, that I deserved to live without guilt for saying no. I needed to learn that being firm doesn't make me a villain. It makes me someone who knows their worth. And that value isn't measured by how much you support others, but by how much you build your own life without losing yourself. Today, when I see my daughter growing up, I'm proud of the man I'm becoming. She'll learn that limits exist, that love isn't exploitation, and that it's possible to rise up even when everyone judges you. This was the greatest motivation I found, to show her that life can be different. I found strength in the love I feel for her and my wife, and this love became my shield against manipulation and resentment. If anyone is reading this and feels trapped in a similar situation, I want them to know that change is possible. It's not easy, it's not painless, but it is liberating. I still feel pain from everything I've been through, but it doesn't define me. Today, I define my life. Today, I know I can be happy without sacrificing myself for others. Today, I live for my daughter, my wife, and myself. And finally, I can say I'm free.